don't think I need to tell anybody who has traveled across the city that we are dealing with a lot of multiple disasters. And there are some communities that are better protected from disaster than others. And part of what makes that possible is the presence or absence of nature. So we saw a lot of trees go down and things like that. Right now, the heat is starting to set in. Some communities have really good canopy cover, even though the storm rolled through. Some don't. And those neighborhoods are heating up very, very quickly. So one thing I did put in the chat already is that I am working with Hark Research. They do great work. City of Houston, Harris County, Student Conservation Association, National Weather Service, and other partners on what will be the largest heat mapping campaign done by community folks in U.S. history. It's going to happen on August the 10th. This is kind of a redo. If those who know that we did the heat mapping in 2020, we're actually going to triple the size in Harris County of the areas that we're going to map using volunteers in cars with meteorological instruments attached. Now, this is going to be very important to get this heat mapping because when we talk about native plants, we're talking about like where should we prioritize native tree planting, grassland plantings like this one behind me. This is a preschool project that I've worked on. It's called the Jefferson Early Learning Center, and wetlands. So where can we put native plants in order to help us be more resilient, bring back biodiversity, human health and well-being, all of those things. But the heat mapping is going to be real central to that because it's going to give us an idea of like, where do we put this stuff? So if you want to be a volunteer, the link is in the chat. You just go to that website. There's a form there you fill out. You go out with people. There's a training involved and all that stuff. And the reason I'm talking about heat mapping is not only do we need volunteers, but it was central to the story I'm going to tell you tonight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip over to my presentation. And let's hope that this works here. All right, here we go. Okay, just give me 1 second here to flip over. Okay, can you all see that?
Yes.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you about a project that's called Greener Gulfton. And when I talk about this project, I just want to remind people that although this occurs in one community, we think that it is a city, county, statewide, maybe national model for like, how do you think about adding nature into a community, particularly a community that is what is called nature-deprived. Nature-deprived neighborhood is one that falls below what scientists think is, and health officials know, to be healthy conditions, right? So Gulfton is a tremendous neighborhood that is the most diverse in the state and in the city. There are over 80 languages spoken in this neighborhood in southeast or southwest Houston. Tremendous leadership, including the three ladies I had the privilege of working and continue to work on this with, Sandra Rodriguez, Maria Hernandez, and Ann Whitlock, who are just wonderful community leaders working with them. And so I'm going to take you through this journey, and then we'll have some open questions at the end, because as much as we learned during this journey, that's the number of questions that also came up, because when you're working in a very dynamic environment, one that is accelerating in terms of climate impacts, a lot of questions come up. And a lot of these questions are very much along the lines of, what do we do differently than we might have done 10 or 12 or 13 or 25 years, 26 years ago when I started my career at the Houston Arboretum? Like, the world has changed. Our approaches need to change. We need to be more clever. And we also need to be thinking hard about the assumptions that we make about native plants and what do we plant and what do we don't plant. So I'm going to go ahead and take it from here. I'm going to set this up by talking about the philosophy. because the philosophy helped to drive the decision making that we did. When we look at the term community, this is typically what we mean. We mean the human beings in a place at a certain time. But if we only plan for human health and well-being, what happens is there are some choices that we make which are not advantageous to native plants and wildlife, but also are not advantageous to the people themselves, because we know that there's this whole connection between people and environmental health, biodiversity health. So we know that we are very gifted, right, with biodiversity. This was from the 2023 City Nature Challenge. And we did the City Nature Challenge this year, and we came in first place in the US again for a number of species that were observed. Some of you participated in it. I know that that's the case in the City Nature Challenge. Thank you. And we have over 10,000 documented species in the county. So we are very blessed from both a biodiversity and human diversity perspective. But the problem is that we often are, both communities, the human and the wild communities, are buffeted increasingly by these disasters. This is from Hurricane Beryl, which really just hit us as a Category 1. And in some places, it was really tropical storm force winds. But these impacts are accumulating. And then back in 2021, right, in February, we had the ice storm Uri. Last year and the preceding year, we had the hottest, driest summers in history. And then we had the derecho here in May. And so what we have seen, I think, and you have seen across the city, are trees that may have withstood former stronger storms, but didn't make it out of Beryl because there is this constant drumbeat of climate-enhanced disasters that are happening. So as we think about greening communities, as we think about greening neighborhoods and even entire regions, we're going to have to really think about which species are best able to withstand not only these disasters, but which ones can provide the highest value to the humans. And my goal with all of this work, and the goal of the committee that was working with me on this, was to rethink community and to be very explicit about this. So this is not community. This is community. So all the living beings in one place. So what can we do to uplift the communal health of all of these beings in a neighborhood? And how can we use that to spur different thinking about community planning in general in this area and beyond? So one of the things that I have done is I'm no longer really a traditional conservationist, although I'm a conservationist and love biodiversity and do community science around it, do habitat restoration for it. I'm really working in this area called One Health. And so what we're looking to do is in planning and policy and funding and action, is to really show that interconnectivity between people and animals and plants and their shared environment. So it could be that there's polluted soil in the 5th Ward. It could be that there are air pollution issues in Manchester. It could be that there are nature inequities in Gulfton. Wherever nature is under assault is where we're interested in working. And unfortunately, that means every place, not just cities, but rural areas as well, and to plan for it in that way. So I'm working with some really talented people on starting a countywide movement around One Health. And if we can do this and do a better job of considering both the people and the indigenous species and other beings, we're going to get to a place where I think we're going to be making better decisions. And I'll talk about a few of those. So this spring, what we did is we launched the first ever, as far as we know, One Health Index, where we took all of these scientific data layers. This work was done by Hark and Asakura Robinson planning firm. And we literally put them on a map. So if you actually look at the real health of a community, and you had the human stuff, the environmental health stuff, and the biodiversity, animal health stuff, and you put it on one place and you put it on a map, what would that community look like? Not just the human stuff. So the other part of this planning process for Greener Gulfton was we wanted to sync up as many things that the city and the county were doing in terms of climate resilience, in terms of human health and well-being, in terms of biodiversity commitments they made. So a lot of this One Health work creates weavers. We are weaving different sectors and different ideas into a tapestry of action, if that makes sense. So we're not just saying we're going to just rebuild habitat for the pollinators or to put in indigenous species because they have a right to be there, which I believe that they do. We're saying we are going to work with nature as a partner and as a community member to rebuild the health of that nature for communal benefit. So this is happening all across the city and the county and the US. People are rebuilding nature for various benefits. This is an overhead shot of this Jefferson Early Learning Center that's right behind me. So as you can see, like I've been working on this project for about 3 years. We put in about 4.5 acres of prairie wetlands here and nearly 200 trees. So in my mind, as we think about places like Gulfton, one of the important things is that we maximize publicly held lands, whether they're schoolyards or parks or office buildings, whatever. That landscape needs to be built for 2024 and the conditions that we live under. So building new school campuses or retrofitting new school campuses to fully infuse the power of native plants is a way to move forward, to stop mowing places we don't need to mow and let them absorb the water, diffuse the heat, provide the habitat, teach the kids, all of that stuff. And even like on our power lines, this is Sarah Flournoy and Don Verser, two incredible prairie advocates. And this is a old growth prairie that is near me on a power line. We're trying to still get Centerpoint to help us or to allow a coalition of groups to manage this. This is a great example of like what we can do if we just don't do things the old way. If we really kind of focus on improving the habitat. All right, let's get to Gulfton. Because Gulfton is a very special neighborhood. Like I said, incredibly diverse. Like when I have to translate stuff, I don't even know where to start because like there's like a billion languages, so much richness, so much strength, so much character. The people are really gracious. And one thing to say is like in 1996 and 7, I would have been in this picture. So I lived in Gulfton because it provided the affordable housing I needed to have in order to work to complete my degree at U of H. Without Gulfton, I just wouldn't have finished college and I wouldn't be a conservationist today. So I owe Gulfton a huge amount of help because of what this neighborhood did for me. And this is still one of the most affordable places. But one of the reasons it's one of the most affordable places is because it is, sorry, my wife just set off my car alarm, is because it has an older housing stock. So when you take a look at Gulfton's human community, they have challenges like everybody else. Some of them have even more challenges because it's a refugee community, it's an immigrant community. A lot of challenges, but a lot of bright spots too. But one of the things that they absolutely have that is unusual is the amount of heat that is being kept in the neighborhood during the summer. You can see this is the 2020 heat mapping. You can see Gulfton is a dark, dark red. And that's because Gulfton was the hottest community that we measured. It was a full 17 degrees Fahrenheit hotter on that day at maximum than the coolest community in the county. That's not uncomfortable, that's deadly. So people literally have had heat strokes waiting for the bus. They've gotten sick, they've gotten heat injured. So this is oftentimes, something that those of us who live in more affluent communities are not sensing because we're not in the middle of this very concrete place. I will also say this, one health connections that I tell people about is that in places that have higher temperatures, crime rates also go up. And why? It's not because the people have anything inherent about them. It's just human beings are not meant to be super hot. I think all of us who had to have a hot house, we all got irritated. So this happens all the time in neighborhoods that are unusually hot. Like I said, nothing inherently different about the people. It's just human beings react that way when they get hot. So one of the things that One Health shows those connections is if you have disinvestment in the community for trees, then it can produce hotter temperatures, and hotter temperatures can produce higher crime rates. So one of the things that you can do is plant trees to reduce the temperature, to reduce those violent crime rates. So if nature is sick, the people will not be healthy. And if the people are not healthy, nature oftentimes suffers as well. So there is this tension, this dynamic. I've done a lot of thermal photography of this area, and here's a typical thermal. The more purple is the cooler. The temperature of these sidewalks sometimes gets blistering. I've measured 138 degrees as a maximum temperature. So hot that you can feel it through your sneakers, right? And like I said earlier, Gulfton is what's called a nature-deprived neighborhood. So there's this Nature Score app online. You can go there, just type in Nature Score. You put in any address, and what it'll do is it'll look at a bubble, and it'll tell you what is your nature score and what does that mean. And you can see here that the nature score is nature, what they're calling nature light, between 20 and 39.9%. That means that it is a low nature area. And when you have a low nature area, multiple challenges arrive for the people who live there. We're going to talk about some of those and what you can do. So one of the things we did is we had a decision point. A lot of times when you do these urban planning projects, what you have to do is you have to think about when are you going to start the clock? So how far are you going to go back? And for my work, I want to know what is the ecological trajectory of this place, but what is the social trajectory of this place as well? So we actually started in ancient times. We wanted to know who was there. And so we did some prehistoric information gathering. We think that this was actually a neighborhood that was a transition zone between Brays Bayou and Buffalo Bayou. So we don't think that this was a place where indigenous people encamped so much as they did hunting. And then when they would move from river to river, right? But there was in a very old, indigenous prehistory here. So we had to recognize that. Then we found this map at Rice University. So Gulfton was once part of a sprawling ranch in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and it was owned by a man named Rice. Yes, the founder of Rice University. This was the W.M. Rice Ranch. And this map shows all the different pastures that people rented from the ranch to graze their cattle. It also shows the existence of some oil and gas wells and some other things. So this land was managed first by the indigenous people using fire and game hunting, then as a cattle ranch, and then it became in the 60s and 70s a place where rapid expansion, rapid building happened of these very large apartment complexes. And when they did that, they built them cheek to jowl, not leaving very much corridor or space for nature. And that's going to impact how we think about it. Fortunately for us, as people who love native plants, we understand that we have an incredible palette to pull from in terms of species. So these are 4 basic habitat types that we can pull species from to reassemble some version of nature for climate resilience and health and biodiversity. But when you look at this neighborhood, and this is at the corner of Gulfton and Rampart, this is a fairly typical scene for some parts of the neighborhood. Now, I want you to ask yourself, how does that make you feel when you look at that? I doubt that any of you feel happy about it because human beings are not designed for habitats like this. This is very poor human habitat. And we know that it's poor because of the research that shows that people who live in highly concretized areas like this without enough nature have higher rates of mental illness. They have higher blood pressure, more stress. They have less feelings of self-confidence and self-worth. So this is a very damaging type of environment to be in. And I lived in a neighborhood like this in high school, and I know that carries a very big burden. So the inclusion of nature is not a net positive always. Sometimes it's just getting to zero. So this is a negative condition right here. So what do we do with something like this that is so concrete, so hot, so hard to look at, and increases your stress levels? And oh, by the way, the indigenous species, this is horrible habitat, right? Not just for this social mammal, these people, but for other species, like their habitat is like demolished here, right? So what do? But first of all, we recognize strengths. So we always want to recognize strengths because neighborhoods are not problems to be solved. They have people who have strengths, who have vision, who have desires and dreams, and they oftentimes have proclivities that you might not guess because of their surroundings. What I tell people is the absence of nature is not the proof that people don't like nature. Oftentimes places don't have nature because they're just underfunded. And what we see in Gulfton is, who worked on this piece while I was at TNC, is that there's an amazing garden culture that happens on patios in these big apartment complexes. People actually love nature from everything that we've heard. They grow everything from ethnobotanical plants, medicinal plants, plants that remind them of home, pollinator plants, you name it. They take these little spaces and they make them into little oases. So we knew that we had a population of people who came from all over the world. Many of them came from agrarian or farming backgrounds or ranching backgrounds, or like places on the mountain that were lush and beautiful, they told us. And they came to this neighborhood because it was an affordable place to start a new life in America, but it didn't have very much nature. So first thing we needed to do is really think about who are the community leaders and what do the people want to see. And eventually, after 11 months, we produced this Greener Gulfton plan in English and Spanish. And basically, it's kind of a roadmap. This is a roadmap for how you take a neighborhood like Gulfton and you infuse it with nature that supports both the humans and the indigenous species simultaneously. And when we did this, what we did is we had a steering committee of some community folks, some folks from the city of Houston, some folks from the county, and then we had green ambassadors. And the green ambassadors were amazing. They were paid to go out and talk to their neighbors about what nature meant to them. What kinds of nature do they want? Where do they want it? For what reasons? And what we found was people wanted nature for exactly the same reasons that people in the Native Plant Society want nature. It's life affirming. It's beautiful. It makes you feel less stressed. Sorry. So when we talk to people in one of the most climate vulnerable neighborhoods in the country, they didn't first say, we need it for climate resilience. They said, I believe my child or my grandmother needs to see a butterfly. That's a basic human right, right? So let's not forget that, like I said, neighborhoods are not problems to be solved. They're communities of people and wildlife that need to be empowered because they're missing some piece. So from a mapping, a flooding perspective, this does have some flooding issues, but it's not as floodable as some of the other communities in the area. So Harris County Flood Control is trying to figure out where to in place flood control measures for that. So the first thing we needed to do from a native plants perspective was we needed to map the current vegetational community. And so we hired Dr. Ryan Bear from Park to create a three-dimensional map of all the trees and vegetation in this neighborhood using LiDAR data. So, penetrating radar that looks at the different layers in a forest. And actually, this is you can't see it here because this is two-dimensional, but we could actually see in some of the renderings that he did kind of what is the three-dimensional perspective. And as you can see there, the canopy is pretty darn light in places. That one really dark splotch there of greenery is a community that's actually embedded in Gulfton called Shenandoah. Another thing we did is I needed to understand which species are here, which ones are overrepresented, which ones are underrepresented. So I did over 1,000 observations using the iNaturalist app, which many of you use, to figure out what are we seeing out there in terms of the wildlife, in terms of the plant life, And what we found was not only did we not have very many trees, relatively speaking, but we didn't have very much diversity of trees. We had like 5 trees that were predominating the canopy, which, as you know, like if you don't have very many tree species and tree diversity, if you have something come and wipe it out disproportionately, like a storm or a disease or something like that, you're going to lose a lot of the canopy that you have. So we wanted to make sure that we captured this, and this is just an ongoing project. As you can see, over 1,000 observations, about 256 species at that time. That's not a lot. I've created about 50 neighborhood level iNaturalist projects. 250 species for that many observations is not a lot, because I was trying to get mass data, but I was also trying to get like specific. And so got a long way to go. There are some pockets of diversity, but not a lot. What we found when Asakura Robinson developed this map, and we divided the neighborhood into 4 sections to look at the specific needs of those 4 sections, is some were super, super hot. You can see the one on the far left, zone 1, is blazing hot, and it has a pretty poor tree canopy cover, but not as poor as zone 2. You can see it's 10%. Now, to put that in perspective, if you're going to build an urban forest for cooling a neighborhood or a block, the canopy level needs to be about 30 to 40%. So you can see like it's way, way down there. You can see that some areas are more flood prone than others. And you have to do all this detailed scientific analysis. But like I said earlier, you also have to go talk to people. So we did tons of events. Part of this was during the pandemic, so we had to do some virtual events, some pop-up events, and be careful about it so that we could mesh the finest science that we could get with the best community engagement we could get. And we conducted all of our things in English, Spanish, and Arabic, because we couldn't do 15 languages, but we decided to do at least 3. And what came out of that, I'm sorry, I have allergies. What came out of that is a series of interventions. What could you do, where, under what condition, and how long would it take to do these? So my friend Michelle Bright, who's a very bright landscape architect, came up with a whole stack of cards for different interventions that could be done and the potential community benefits, everything from human health to biodiversity to environmental benefits, art, and climate resilience, and how much benefit could they be along the way. So we're going to take a look at some of those interventions. What we found once we did the detailed analysis, we did the community engagement, is that there were 7 major things that could be done in this very, very dense neighborhood. One was we could create cooling corridors. So basically, let's take a look where the heat is building up the fastest and where the tree canopy cover is the weakest. And let's plant those areas. Second thing we could do is we could create spots of nature where people spent a lot of time, like bus stops. You could create more support for sidewalk improvements. Unfortunately, the city of Houston just got $48 million with an M to split between Gulfton and another community. You can increase gardens and parks. Fortunately, Precinct 4 is doing amazing work at a park redevelopment plan for the one park in the neighborhood called Burnett Balin. So of these 7, all 7 are being activated to one degree or another already. And that's because the city and the county and community partners have been leading and coordinating. So I'm very excited about all the things that are happening. Let me just show you a couple things. While I was still at Tennessee, we went out with our buddies at Texas A&M Forest Service. This is Mac Martin. And we piloted a new app that they created to test pilot right here. And what we did is we literally went around the neighborhood and we looked at the places that could have trees based on the spacing. Is there enough space for a tree? Is it far enough away from infrastructure? And we literally mapped where every tree could go in the neighborhood. And we thought that there were about enough room for about 500 trees. Well, turns out that there was room for about 804 trees. So this gave us a real idea, like, where can we strategize on putting trees? And fortunately, I will say that the Houston Endowment stepped up, gave money to Trees for Houston, and they are going to be planting starting this fall 800 trees. So yay for them and yay for us in this community, which is very cool. But it started with, let's put the plan together, let's do the science to map it, and then let's go ahead and push that out in the media. And a big media push was done by TNC. We got lots of attention, and then that motivated donors and other groups to get involved. So it's a chain of being. Another thing you could do in a neighborhood like this to increase nature is to get real novel. So for places that are too narrow for trees, we created with a group called Ultra Barrio. It's a very talented design firm, these modular shade structure concepts. And what we didn't want to do was add hard infrastructure on hard infrastructure. So what we did instead was they designed systems to mimic lily pads, get that organic shape, and have planter beds that could hold some hardy vines and other things that are native, that support native species. So we're not adding hard structures on top of concrete, but rather we are reintegrating nature into these structures and reintegrating nature back into the fabric of the community. And you're probably saying, like, who the heck is going to water those? And what I will say is, you're absolutely right for asking that question. Now, what we have seen, because Gulfton is so hot and the soils are so bad oftentimes, what we can do is we can do some prospecting. We can look at the worst soils that nobody ever waters, and we can see what's surviving. And there are multiple vine species that actually are doing very well, thank you, despite being in terrible soils and not water. So the neighborhood itself has conducted this experiment kind of accidentally for us, and so we're gonna take advantage of some of those species. This may actually happen this fall. So one of the things that we wanted to see was we wanted to see more bus shelters in the neighborhood, but the regular shelters that Metro had been putting in place for a long time with the plexiglass walls, if you've ever ridden in one of those are super hot. Sometimes they're so hot that people wait outside of the shelter in the shade of the shelter instead of waiting in the shelter. So fortunately, Metro has worked with a number of people, and we got this design, and it's going into further refinement by Link Houston, who's leading the way here. And we're hoping to pilot this. Now, this green bus, this green roof, which would be composed of prairie plants, they're not going to be watered, but instead of like having a dome at top, they'll have a trough, so it'll collect some water. And there has been a lot of work around prairie soils for green roofs that somebody at the Blackland Collective named John Hart Asher has done over the year to make it very light, but very kind of spongy. And we think that those sorts of engineered soils will be great. And then another natural experiment has told us which native species might work well. And that is the green roof at the permit building for the city of Houston. The irrigation was broken there for a couple, 3 years. So we just looked at like what is surviving and what is colonizing this space. And so we got some good species like knotroot bristlegrass and Indian blanket and certain other species that really survived like really terrible conditions for several years. So get back to this horrible picture, right? I love the mural behind it, by the way. It's so emblematic of the people. So maybe you go from something like this to something like this, right? So you start to reinfuse nature into a very concrete place, and you start to see these benefits for both people and wildlife. You start to reinfuse the neighborhood with nature-themed artwork. So as people talked about what their values were in terms of nature and what they wanted to see, they told us, nature, real nature is great, artful nature is great, and please don't give us ugly structures and other things to help protect us from the heat. If you're going to put things in here, know that we're artistic people. We like bright colors, and we have sensibilities like you do in terms of form and function. So this is actually what's called a placita. This is a concept that's really built around the fact that many people really have this need to connect with other people. So how can you make these mini plazas that can be infused into the neighborhood to allow people to kind of congregate and be in places? So this is Gulfton existing in planned projects. So our friends over at the county put this map together, and this shows you that there's going to be a lot of stuff happening in the neighborhood to reinfuse it with nature. And I'll talk a little bit about what problems that brings up, but big shout out um, to the congressperson, Lizzie Fletcher, and others who worked on getting that sidewalk mapping or the sidewalk funding to increase tree canopy cover, mitigate heat, and provide better walkways to allow people walk. To the county, who's really leading on the redevelopment of Burnett Bayland Park, and they're using some crime prevention by design funding from the federal government to put in artwork and better lighting, biophilic lighting, and other green measures, and to the Houston Endowment, Trees for Houston, for committing to all these trees. So that when we get to this place of celebration where we can bring in the nature that people deserve, we can really start to make an impact and really start to connect people back to native plants, right? So one of the things about native plants that I use in every project that I do, is that it's grounding. It's connecting to place. And for a neighborhood like Gulfton, where people are coming from dozens and dozens of countries, one of the best things we can be doing, right, is planting two kinds of plants. Some that are familiar to them, that are food plants or medicine plants, and make them feel at home. We want them to feel at home. But also, these native plant gardens can help them understand, where are they now, right? And bringing some of these native ecologies back to places like Gulfton is a great way of saying, you're here, this is your new home, and this is what your new home has looked like in part for thousands of years. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing, and I am going to open it up for questions. See if I can make this work. Like I said, I'm learning the technology. Now, I didn't mention something about the tree list, so I'll mention that in a second. I'm just going to see if somebody asks a question first.
Everyone can unmute themselves if they want to ask a question.
Hello, Jaime. It's Angela Roth. How are you?
Hey, Angela, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Hey, I was just over at Coulter Elementary's Pocket Prairies, and we have so many plants that we could share with people from Gulfton, even starting off in small little pocket prairies.
Oh, neat.
Ours are exploding. Like I have everything. I have seeds, I have plants, and we have too many. Like they really, truly are. There's too many rattlesnake masters, if that's such a thing. and we don't water them. You know, this is all stuff growing itself.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, and that kind of thing. So thank you for that, because I think this fall is really we're actually creating a new exciting committee for the Gulfton Super Neighborhood Council called Transit and Environmental Health. Like, what is the One Health implications of all this nature? And so that's really starting to get rolling. So I think by this fall, I think we can maybe start distributing some of those plants. So we appreciate it.
Also, is there any movement to get like the water that comes off of HVAC systems? We divert that into a place
Oh
where
my God.
button bush or something?
Yeah. So yes. So your brain is like, we're mind melding like a Star Trek. I mean, we have not made any progress on that. We're moving slowly with the apartment owners because they have a lot of stuff going on and whatnot. But there is, like you said, like a horrendous amount of water coming from these giant, if there's a way of capturing that, you're talking about an oasis building, I mean, you could have green stormwater well. I mean, you could have a lot of stuff. So I think it's a fantastic idea. We'll say we've made zero progress on that, but it's just sitting there waiting to be used instead of going down the gutter.
Have y'all made any kind of videos to sort of get people's attention, especially people like Centerpoint, and kind of make a groundswell of people to say, look, this is not hard. We can do it.
Yeah, no, we've engaged with the community quite a bit, but nascent. I think what's going to happen, Angela, from my perspective, is that kind of stuff is going to be super important. Once people start getting engaged to put in trees and gardens and things like that, it's going to be a good time to hit them with some of that stuff. Fortunately, because of all the media attention that we shine, it was like focusing a light through a magnifying glass. We knew that doing the science and the planning and the community engagement was only going to take us to a certain part of the road. What we needed to then do is, because a plan, as you know, I joked with somebody the other day, if you get a paper plan, you put it over your head, it's not going to protect you from climate change, nor is it going to add to your life. It doesn't do anything unless it's activated. And so what we did is we said, the next step is a media blitz. And we did an all-out blitz on media. Mm-hmm. And we started getting calls from decision makers and foundations like, what's going on in Gulfton? I keep on hearing it's super hot. It doesn't have enough nature. And so it's really opened up tens of millions of dollars of investments that are coming in. But that's the power of storytelling. Good storytelling is good conservation. So yes, always we need more material.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you for this lovely talk. Have you had any resistance when you plant these wonderful native plants? I live in an area where we have one of those 2x4 or 2x5 strips along the road, and some of the people complain that it looks like weeds. And of course, there's the plants that come up first and then they die down, and the other ones. And it does not look like a manicured garden, but it's wonderful for the pollinators. How do you help people understand this is beauty, this is nature?
Yeah, no, I think that this is something that is just an issue. So our product, Native Plant Society, me, other people, our product is native plants and nature, right? Unfortunately, we all have been raised in a country where that kind of thing is just not only is it not normal, but it's like fought against, right? So I think one of the things that we have to do is, it's all contextual. So in the park, in Burnett Bayland Park, these pollinator gardens are very popular because otherwise in the neighborhood, you don't get a big chance to see a lot of flowers, right? So when people see flowers, they're like, wow, this is really great. But in other places that are tidier, you have this pushback. So I think one of the big calls to action is that we, and I'm saying the collective we, any nature groups that are in the region, need to really do some research about what people's knowledge and attitudes and values are around these native plants. What I tell people now is, like, if we are creating landscapes and maintaining landscapes that are built for Victorian times, well, then our city cannot be more resilient. It cannot be better prepared for all these disasters, and it'll continue to pollute. So one of the things that that came out last October was this really big report that a lot of people don't even know about. It was looking at the air pollution that is caused by lawn equipment, and it looked at it from around the U.S. and it ranked all the counties in the U.S. in terms of air pollution produced by lawn equipment. Well, guess what? We came in first place for most pollution from lawn equipment. Harris County did. There's so much air pollution that's produced by all these dirty gas-powered lawnmowers and weed eaters and blowers that it's the equivalent of producing the same amount of pollution from 3.8 million cars on the road. So these landscapes are polluting us, and they're costing us a lot of taxpayer money, and they're not absorptive. So I think it's a collective we question that really needs to have a communications campaign built around why non-traditional landscapes like prairies and urban forests and things are so valuable, because I think a lot of people have no idea how polluting and climate damaging regular landscapes are. And once they learn that, it might unlock different things in them. But we need to do the research. We can't just, we keep kind of guessing a little bit. So let's do the research together.
Hey, Jaime, I was talking with Beth Clark, and she said that they had put in a big strip in front of some company a few years ago, and people got kind of weirded out. They're like, oh
Yeah.
no. So they just basically mowed around just the edge to let people know that it was being cared for. And that little bit of showmanship or whatever, compromise helps these people who think, oh, if it's too crazy, it's not right.
Yes, it's called legibility. Like, do people, I often joke that when we brought the English lawn over, we forgot the meadow part. We just brought the lawn part.
Right.
But you know how that dynamic is with these English lawns, and you have these beautiful meadows, and then you have this crisp line around it. Well, we just brought the crisp line. And so in every project, whether it's MD Anderson or Jefferson Early Learning Center or Memorial Park that I've worked on, having that legible, crisp line around it is like you said, like super critical, because it then looks intentional and it doesn't look like a mistake. One thing I didn't mention as you guys are thinking about potential questions is which native plants to plant. So there are, and this is where this conversation may go sideways. I'm just going to warn you. When we look at the trees that are and are not surviving because these increased temperatures and these disasters, as I talk with foresters and work with them on climate-ready tree palettes, and we did one for Gulfton, like, what do we think might survive in 30 years? I mean, we're doing a lot of prognosticating because so many variables, right? We can't say that what exactly worked 20 years ago is going to work 30 years in the future. Anybody who's been here for the last 2 summers know that southern magnolias are in real trouble. There were tens of thousands of southern magnolias that died across the region. There are other species that are not doing well that have been here. We're kind of on the edge of their range anyway. And so there's real discussion out there about, like, do we bring some species that are a little bit further south up? Because the last thing you want to do is spend tens of millions of dollars planting a bunch of trees that are going to die because they're not climate adapted anymore. So that brings up a lot of philosophical questions about, like, what is truly native, what needs to be moved. And so these are active conversations that we're having. We're even talking about coupling ecological knowledge of foresters and ecologists with artificial intelligence, because there's so many values and variables involved that we're going to have to really think about this. We can't be kind of stuck in the orthodoxy that we can only plant things that have been here historically, because the situation is so dire and so complicated. So what I'm not saying is we're going to have a wholesale, like, switch out of species. That's not what I'm saying. There are certain species that we think are going to do well into the future, like live oaks and some other oaks and some other things. But there's some species that are going to fall off. So what do you do with that dynamic? And I will tell you that we don't have an answer. We are trying to figure this out. This is a very dynamic system. And so with Gulfton, we did our best to put together what we think will be survivable in the next 30 years. But conditions on the ground are changing faster than we anticipated. So we'll see if that makes sense.
Thank you, Jaime. This is Lisa Morano. Always a pleasure. My question is it possible for us to get a list of what these plants are that you guys have settled on for that neighborhood? Because they probably do well in lots of places.
The answer is, and I think I'm off mute. The answer is yes. I can definitely send it to Bob and the NIPSOT group. It's an Excel spreadsheet. We took, I don't know, maybe 2 months talking between 9 ecologists, foresters, and other people to settle out on a species. So what we did is we started with the city of Houston's approved tree list. They have a street list, and you have to stick by that. But then what we did is we thought, which one of these are likely to survive? And then also for the nursery trade, what can the nursery trade get? And so we got a lot of information from Texas and Forest Service, Trees for Houston, and others. And so we came up with this list based on a number of tensions and realities on the ground. So my answer to you is yes, I can provide that list that we came up with. And also that's just a baby list in terms of, like, where we could go from here. And it will continue to evolve as we learn more and we see more impacts. I know it's great to see you, Lisa.
One of the questions that's in the chat, perhaps you're not able to see it, was whether or not you can cut the concrete in some of these areas and add green.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. I'm going to answer that with two observations. One is, in certain locations in the US, they do have a de-asphalting system going on, which is particularly on schoolyards in places like New York City, Baltimore, Detroit, and Philadelphia, which are very concretey places. They're actually deconcretizing schoolyards and putting in trees and other green systems. So you can, it's expensive, but I will tell you that in Gulfton and in certain other communities, you have charter or private schools in strip malls. And these strip malls are often devoid of any sort of nature. And so what I tell people is, like, even before you step into the building, because of those negative impacts of literally seeing and being around concrete, the children are harmed before they even step through the door, right? So I would be like amazed and very grateful if deconcretization became a thing here for those things. But the bigger opportunity, I think the more reasonable opportunities, as the city comes in with this federal funding to put in better sidewalks, there's opportunities for adding trees and greenery and other things. So road development, if done well, and Metro may or may not still put in the bus rapid transit system that it was promising, there are big infrastructural pieces that could be done to add more greenery in there. I saw a question of, like, if I want to join One Health, where do I go? There is no place right now. I will tell you that this is where we are right now with the One Health effort. Is we're about to bring together some really good systems thinkers from different sectors: climate, indigenous folks, conservation, environmental justice, public health. We're about to design an event where we come together and we say, how do we build a movement around One Health? What are the elements that we would need to do that? So I think of this as like we're trying to build a rocket to go to the moon. Right now, we're like in the John Glenn section of that. We're designing the first spaceship. So at some point, there's going to be an honest to God One Health Harris County Action Hub is what we're calling it. It does not exist right now, but it's going to be a catalytic center that helps people understand and activate these strategies. So TBD on that. We will definitely continue to tell people as we start to develop this. It is at baby level, but we do have some resources like the One Health Index and other things. So just keep radio tuned for more for me and others who are working on this.
Do you have a newsletter?
For the One Health thing, no. It is like literally a couple of products, a couple of presentations. And like I said, like we need to figure out. So basically, I'm taking a little bit of chapter out of the prairie movement. When we started a renewed prairie movement back in 2009, we had to figure out, like, what do we do to get the prairie groups to work together and to catalyze all this partnership? That's kind of where we are. We're in like 2009, where the prairie community was really hyper connected now, but that was not an accident. That was by intention, and we designed it to be that way with Coastal Prairie Partnership and CPC and WHF, and everybody designed it to work together. And so we're going to need a movement that is intentional, that has milestones and predictions, right? So that's what we're working on. Is we're creating a movement building blueprint right now. So there will be things like that in the future for sure. One thing that I didn't mention, I'm just going to mention this real quickly, is because some people ask me about this. What about green gentrification? So if you bring a lot of nature into a neighborhood very rapidly, is that likely to attract the type of development that actually displaces the people that are living there whose benefit you wanted to make, right? And so before we even started this, we did go to the Kinder Institute and ask, what is the stability of the housing stock? Like, is this likely to flip things over? And they said, well, it's pretty stable right now. But it is something to think about as we move forward, because there is no ironclad way of knowing whether what you're going to do is going to spur that kind of thing. I think that there are a couple things that are more often to spur that rapid development of park space. And the second thing is it connected to a large trail system that can put people in easy proximity, and is it close to the city center, right? So there are a few things that augur against green gentrification, but it depends on the kind of investment and development that happens. And so, community leaders are going to be monitoring that pretty closely. Unfortunately, because of our developmental history and codes, there's not a lot of protection. So I think care in this case is going to be vital.
You made such a great point about the benefit of the media blitz. And what you're telling us now is the importance of education. What can we do about that? How do we educate people? Get people to speak at garden clubs, church events? What can we do to educate people?
Well, I'll tell you, like, if we want more people to buy native plants, there are multiple things we can do. Obviously Wildscapes workshops and talks and all that stuff are really great. I would suggest that there are a couple other things that we can do that could be additive. One thing, like I said, is sometimes we guess a lot, and that's including me, about what people value or don't value or know or don't know about native plants. And so that sort of kind of guessing in terms of communication sometimes means that our efforts are wasted or they're not highly effective. So when I was doing an environmental communications credential at Duke, we studied something called social marketing. And what that is it's a way of looking at a problem by reverse engineering it. So not saying, I'm going to tell people about these things about native plants, but rather doing in-community research about what the barriers and opportunities are for that particular community. As far as I know, there's never been a social marketing campaign around native plants in Houston or any Houston community. I think a group like NIPSOT could lead in this way. I think that they could pick a neighborhood and do a social marketing campaign to figure out what opens up that community to native plants. That's original research that could be done, that could be highly informative for other neighborhoods. The things that would be learned from that process, some of those would be translatable, some would not, but I would love to pick a neighborhood and say, we are going to figure out what people know and don't know, what the barriers are and how to overcome them for this one community. And that's going to be our test kitchen. I think that would be very important. The other thing is, when I retire, and I put a piece of AI produced art on this up on social media, I think that we need to buy some school buses and retrofit them to put native plants on and take them to the neighborhood. Think ice cream truck, but with native plants. And a lot of times when we're asking people to go to Wildscapes workshop or go to the Edith Elmore nursery or go to Buchanan's, that's one thing. But what if on Saturday mornings in the fall and the spring, you loaded up a bunch of native plants onto buses that you got donated or whatever, and you literally took them out to neighborhoods, and you wanted to have the school, the ice cream truck, like, and people come to associate, like, oh, the native plant people are coming, and they're coming to our neighborhood. Check this out. You would be sold out in some neighborhoods, like, by the end of that. And along the way, you are telling the story of native plants, right? So sometimes it's hard for people to get to take the plants to the people, right? Make it a show. And so that's just that kind of a crazy idea, but I think it might work. There'd have to be some thinking around it.
Jaime, there's a question from Nancy Hannon. In the areas that you've already planted, much of the community wants it, but have there been vandalism of some of the projects?
So none of the big projects have gone in yet. So there have not been any issues because they're just not there yet. Now, as the county starts in placing these things, as the city, community members, Trees for Houston, we're going to have to find out. But you know, in the tree plantings that I've seen in the community, I haven't seen any kind of vandalism of any of that stuff. Now, you know, they're going to be putting in lighting fixtures and things. And what was interesting about that was we were connecting the county to a researcher at UT Health Science and a local expert in proper biophilic lighting, because lighting is actually a lot more important to health than we think it is. And it's got to be at the right wavelengths. It's got to be in the right direction. So, you know, I think sometimes people forget that we are actual mammals, like literal mammals. And as mammals, we actually have lighting conditions that throw off our circadian rhythms and are not good for our health. And they go through like windows and things like that. So if you're going to be doing human habitat restoration, which is what this is, in a very literal sense, you're restoring habitat for an imperiled mammal species. You have to have the right kinds of plants, the right kinds of light, the right kinds of civic space, because we're a social mammal, right? We have to have these plazas and things. So if you think about it from that perspective, not that we're humans, but we're actual social mammals, you're like, what codes for good social mammal habitat? Then it starts to click that all of these choices that we make are very different. And if we start to think about it from a One Health perspective, like, no, we're not just going to put some random plants. We're going to put in plants that perform 5 or 6 or 7 functions, not just aesthetic choices. So I haven't seen any vandalism in terms of any of these projects because, frankly, a lot of them have not been put in yet. We'll have to see. And I'm not monitoring all the chat, but I'm looking through here now. Yeah, painted utility boxes, absolutely. Anytime we can put some more nature, even if it's representational. There's even some paint that they're using in Poland, I'll just tell you this, to create nature art. And the paint itself actually absorbs air pollution. It's like a twofold thing. Like you put the nature in, but it actually absorbs particulate matter and air pollution, which is incredible. And I think Nancy Edwards is the one who asked about joining One Health. Nancy, you know my email. Email me. I'll shoot you some resources for what we've developed already. We have developed some things that we can share with you.
She's got another question. Is there a place to volunteer to install the plants?
Yeah, so I think that the first trees are going to go in November. So as soon as we, unfortunately, for those of you who, Catherine Newton, who's just an amazing person at Trees for Houston, I think she is not going to be there. She's going to be the executive director at Willow Waterhole Conservancy, which is an amazing space. So they're just going to be some kind of like readjustment of things like that. So hopefully we can roll with those tree plantings in November, December, January, that the whole planting area right there. But we will keep people informed. I'm sure that there'll be volunteer opportunities to put trees in.
I know there's so many questions, Jaime. If you are there any more questions? They just keep coming. Like any other questions? Like y'all's questions were so good.
They were so good. I always get good questions from the IPSAT members. You guys are one of the best informed groups that I ever speak to. So
yeah, it's kind of like you're preaching to the choir, but still it's like, I don't know, we still absorb so much. Like this was a lot of novel information for me, at least personally. And I love your background image too. It's so inspiring.
Well, if you ever get a chance to visit the Jefferson Early Learning Center in Alief, I wish I would have gone there when I was a kid. It has won a stack of awards, including the best design of any preschool in the state. And it's because of the leadership of Alief ISD, the brilliant architect, Melissa Turnbaugh, who worked on this with a lot of different people. We had a lot of different partners on this, but it's what school grounds need to look like, just straight up. And I'll tell you that the ecological restorations, the initial ecological restorations that we did cost about $77,000, which sounds like a lot of money, but in terms of the total project cost, it's a rounding error. It was a rounding error, literally. Like, I think the total project cost was like $36 million. So if you think about $77,000 out of that, to do it a better way, we're not talking about breaking the budget. We're just talking about changing the mentality.
Did you say Jefferson Early Learning Center?
Mm-hmm. It's set on
okay.
Bel Air Boulevard.
Yeah, we were supposed to do our pot drive for them this meeting, but we weren't able to meet in person. So they're the ones who we were collecting pots for them, and hurricanes and derechos.
Oh, no problem. Well,
Railing the effort.
they're so awesome that they have embraced nature so much. The principal there is Kimberly Hammer, and she's amazing. And so they have hired an outdoor learning coordinator. So it's like super awesome. And I'm working with them on a couple other projects with the district, even though just from a contractual standpoint. So super excited about what's happening in Alief.
Well, did you have any more for us? I'm not trying to cut you off or anything.
No.
If there are any more questions.
Yeah, poor soils in Gulfton. Yeah, adding amendments is going to be super important for those initial plantings. There's some money for a soil amendment. So yeah, I mean, it's gonna, you don't want to put a good tree in a bad hole with bad soil, right? So fortunately, our partners are very good at all this stuff, and soil amendments will have to be part of the process for sure. And I don't have anything else. I'm going to go ahead and put my email. Like I said, I'm looking to secure a new position and have some good leads there, fortunately. But if, for the time being, if you have any questions, you can always find me here, or LinkedIn is just, it's another good way of getting a hold of me. I'm on social media, as many of you know. I'm just going to put my LinkedIn thing if you want to connect with me there, or email. So appreciate your time, and I'm just about out of allergy breath here. So it's a good time to wrap up, and I just truly appreciate all the work that you are doing. If you all want to know more about social marketing and how that can help to change ideas and whatnot, please be in contact. I'd love to see this happen in a neighborhood. I think it would be a great project for NIPSOT to maybe even partner with other groups on, because at the end of the day, what I tell people is, you know, Coca-Cola sells a lot of Coke because they have a massive amount of market research. The Native Plant Society and native plant enthusiasts need market research so they can sell their product better. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jaime. That was so inspiring.
Thank you.
We have a good suggestion from Anna.
Right.
Have a contest to paint native plants and butterflies on metro buses. Happy site. And
Do it.
and thank you also to Bob for helping us so much with Zoom. And yeah, I mean, this was just such an inspiring talk, because the whole time I'm thinking about the landscaping that I see on just typical commercial site. And it's like putting us in a box, you know, and it's just entrapping us. And this is just the opposite of that. And it's so inspiring to see. We appreciate you so much, all of your work, Jaime. And yeah, we love to have you speak to us and educate us.
I'm having a little, I'd like to try that salted caramel. I don't think I tried that one salted caramel.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I'm in my thighs.
All right.
Salted
Thanks so
caramel.
much.
That
Bob,
is a
you're
good
the best.
idea.
Appreciate all that.
Thank you.
That was great.
So-
Take care.